It was a landmark day in American racing, a day when the most famous racetrack in the country and the most popular form of racing were brought together. NASCAR in Indianapolis, together at last. The first Brickyard 400 was a race more anticipated than any before or since. It was unequaled excitement, a result of years of buildup. The 1994 Brickyard 400 dates back decades before it actually happened. For the first 75 years in its existence, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway held one race per year, had 350,000 spectators, and closed for the rest of the year. The first time a stock car graced the Brickyard came on November 21, 1961, when Pontiac held a 24-hour endurance test. The NASCAR stars chosen to participate were Fireball Roberts and Joe Weatherly. Since it was a private test, there was never any hint it would inspire an actual race. In 1970, a copy of Indianapolis was built in Southern California. Ontario Motor Speedway was called the Indy of the West. But unlike Indy, Ontario hosted many series. NASCAR first raced there in 1971. The races there were very competitive.
Simply remarkable competition.
One of the main figures in Ontario's brief history was John Cooper, president of the track from 1971 to 72. When the track went bankrupt for the first time at the end of 1972, Cooper went to work for NASCAR, where he became vice president in charge of marketing. Indianapolis track owner Tony Holman died in October 1977. During his 32 years owning the track, Holman maintained the one race per year tradition, but his death set into motion a period of change for the Speedway. In October 1979, John Cooper was named president of Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Already well respected among all forms of motorsports, Cooper looked to be the strongest link there ever was between Indianapolis and NASCAR. Within months, there was talk of a race. In December 1979, Daytona International Speedway was in a tax dispute with a county who claimed they owed $600,000 in back taxes. Bill France said the track was granted tax-exempt status by the state in the 1950s. When that was later repealed by the state in 1973, France wanted the dispute settled in his favor. If the county really treated NASCAR poorly, he said he would move the Daytona 500 to Ontario in 1981 and move the Firecracker 400 to Indianapolis, possibly as soon as 1980. While the tax dispute never led to any change, it was the first sign that NASCAR at Indianapolis was possible, and maybe even closer than expected. Bill France insisted, quote, "We haven't finalized anything, but it looks promising. We want Indianapolis on the NASCAR schedule." A year later, the two sides seemed closer than ever to reaching a deal. As teams and drivers went through the 1981 season, hanging over them was the idea that they may soon be racing at Indy. John Cooper admitted interest in a NASCAR race and said it was even something that Tony Holman had considered during his life. In May 1981, it was reported that talks were progressing for a NASCAR race at Indy in 1982. Richard Petty attended a practice session for the Indy 500 and said, quote, "I do expect to run here in stock cars. If things go right, we could be here in 2 or 3 years." Buddy Baker predicted NASCAR would draw 200,000 fans to Indy for a race. Bobby Allison said it would further spread NASCAR out of the Southeast and inspire more tracks to be built in the Midwest. Junior Johnson thought it would be a good race, but the walls at Indy would need to be built much taller for stock cars. From the 1930s to the early 1990s, the walls surrounding Indianapolis were only 22 inches tall at their highest. It was said that maybe Indy could become the 4th of July race, and the Firecracker 400 would become the Cup season finale. Daytona would then open and close the NASCAR season, and it made sense, as they needed a new track to replace Ontario, which closed in 1980, after Ontario had hosted the final race for the last 7 years. Or it was rumored that maybe Talladega would become the season finale, and Indy would take their date in early August. With interest on both sides, it finally happened. A deal was reached to bring NASCAR to Indianapolis in 1982. And then it fell apart. While John Cooper reached a deal with NASCAR, it didn't meet the approval of board chairman Mary Holman, widow of Tony Holman. According to the Indianapolis News, Mary Holman wanted to maintain her husband's tradition of keeping the Indy 500 as the only race at Indy, and she killed the deal. This caused a strained relationship between Cooper and Holman and was considered a main reason when he quit as track president one day before practice began for the 1982 Indy 500. While NASCAR was kept out of Indy in the 80s, a changing dynamic happened during the decade. Added media coverage allowed NASCAR to overtake IndyCar as the most popular form of auto racing in the country. By the end of the decade, NASCAR was at the top of the mountain and set the stage for new possibilities in the 1990s. The end of the 80s saw a change for Indianapolis as well. In December 1989, 30-year-old Tony George, the grandson of Tony Holman, was named president of the Speedway. While George brought a new point of view to the Speedway leadership, he originally didn't see NASCAR as an option. In a May 1990 interview with the Indianapolis News, George said, quote, "The only way there would be another type of race here would be if there were no Indy cars and no Indy drivers." He added that he didn't want to set aside the tradition of one race. The first step towards this latest push of NASCAR racing in Indianapolis came in September 1991, the result of an icon using his influence.
While at the Speedway filming a television commercial, NASCAR and Indy legend A.J. Foyt just couldn't resist the opportunity to take his Copenhagen Oldsmobile for a few hot laps around the Brickyard. While the car was set up for Talladega testing, A.J. still turned in some impressive laps.
I think he could run probably 165 or maybe close to 170 miles an hour here. This track would be pretty close to similar like Ontario Motor Speedway used to be. And he'd probably run 170 or faster.
There is no doubt all racing fans would love to see a stock car race at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway one day. But at this time, there are no such plans to stage such an event. But for one day, it was great just to imagine that it just could happen.
By December 1991, it was reported that the track was in talks with NASCAR about a race that would be held as soon as 1993. Besides NASCAR's massive popularity, it was said that George might be doing this because of a feud with IndyCar leadership. Journalist Robin Miller wrote, quote, "Tony believes it would be financially rewarding, and he would also enjoy letting CART know it's not the only game in town."
This was the scene yesterday of a meeting by CART IndyCar owners in which they heard a proposal from Indianapolis Motor Speedway President Tony George that could change the face of IndyCar racing in the United States.
Just 1 month earlier, George had proposed a plan to CART management that would reshape the leadership of the organization.
Originally, CART was controlled by an 11-member board, but now all 24 teams that own a CART franchise make the rules. Now, 24 teams are fine for smaller races, but when Indianapolis Motor Speedway President Tony George was faced with the possibility of having fewer than 33 cars for his 500 this past year, he decided to do something about it. And that's what led us to this meeting of CART owners.
He implied IndyCar could grow too if CART's board of directors weren't always fighting, and the series would be better off with one strong leader like NASCAR always had. He suggested that Goodyear's Leo Mel should be installed as a leader, but that plan was rejected.
Well, I did in fact make a presentation to the owners today that for all intents and purposes was rejected, and right now we're considering.
The IROC Dodge Daytonas underwent the first test in IROC history at the historic Brickyard. While defending Indy champion Rick Mears tested, the Daytonas waited their turn at the 2.5-mile flat oval. The main purpose of the test was to determine the feasibility of running the IROC cars at the Speedway, and the results were considered successful by the mechanics and the test drivers, which included veterans Dave Marcus, Jim Sauter, and Dick Trickle. President Jay Signori echoed their feelings.
We felt it was a great honor to be invited to Indianapolis Motor Speedway to be the first stock car style cars to test there. The Dodge Daytonas performed well. Dave Marcus, Dick Trickle, and Jim Sauter felt it a great honor along with the IROC series to be running at Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
With the IROC test a success, NASCAR made their arrival on June 22nd.
An estimated, get this, 40,000 fans showed up to watch 9 Winston Cup teams run at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
Gasoline Alley at the famed Indianapolis Motor Speedway, where 9 of NASCAR Winston Cup's most elite drivers showed up for what NASCAR claims as an unofficial Goodyear tire test. But it was obvious that from the time the teams hit the garage area, the fans were frantic with Winston Cup fever. With the engine still silent, there was a roar of acceptance as drivers delivered the personal touch that has helped to take this sport to a national prominence, and now delivered it to the world's most famous speedway. At 11 a.m. Monday, June 22nd, 1992, the anticipation of testing Winston Cup cars at Indy became a reality.
Oh yeah, I'm just having a great time. I mean, I pulled out. I had the honor of putting my car on, about being the very first car on the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for a stock car. When I fired that thing up and pulled out going into turn 1, there's 50-some thousand people, I guess that's what they say is here, and they were just hooting and hollering all over the place and just going crazy, and it really sent chills down you. And then we went out and we started doing some drafting practice, and 3 and 4s were running, and I passed the car 3 wide going down the front straightaway. I mean, they just freaked out. So, I mean, they're loving it. They're starved for competition up here. The Indy 500 is a neat deal, but they only get it once a year, and they want more than that.
All right, what do y'all think about NASCAR coming to Indy?
On day 2, Dale Earnhardt pulled a switcheroo. That's his car. But look who took a turn behind the wheel on the second day. Super Tex, who knows about getting around the Brickyard in a hurry. Now, the real fun began when all 9 drivers headed out for a gang tire test. An unofficial mini winner-take-all race was KO'd by Speedway insurance rules. Still, it was hard to imagine anyone testing any harder than they did. Just ask Dale Earnhardt.
It was great coming down the straightaway, and there are all the grandstands up on each side, and you know, watching Indy cars run here on TV and everything. I've never been at the racetrack before, and pretty good rush.
And when it was all over, everyone was a winner.
Track's got a lot of potential. It really does. It surprised me the cars work as good as they do here on this flat racetrack.
Just the whole atmosphere of this whole program has been incredible. It's been an experience that I'll never forget.
I love it. I think it's the greatest thing we've done probably in my racing career anyway. I never thought I'd get a chance to drive at Indy, so neat to be here.
And when the trucks rolled out, one could only wonder, will they be back for the first ever Winston Cup race at Indy?
The biggest hurdle for a NASCAR race was that the Speedway's short walls would have to be rebuilt, so the writing was on the wall when over the winter, renovations raised the walls from 22 to 42 inches. Finally, the announcement was made on April 14, 1993.
For the first time ever, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway will host a non-IndyCar event.
The announcement will please stock car fans and the central Indiana economy.
The Brickyard will be opening its gates to the good old boys of NASCAR. The race will be called the Brickyard 400.
Since the first race in 1911, the Indianapolis 500 has been the only auto racing event ever held at the Speedway. Until now.
It is for the sake of the fans who love racing. Indianapolis is a special place that we choose to undertake the building of a new tradition, as well as continue to build on the tradition of the Indianapolis 500. There will be a NASCAR Winston Cup stock car event here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. The name of the event will be the Brickyard 400, and it will be a 400-mile, 160-lap race.
The NASCAR drivers on hand for that announcement from Tony George said all the right things of what could become Winston Cup Racing's crown jewel. Record-setting crowds and prize money are expected.
The race was scheduled for a Saturday, leaving a Sunday as a rain date to help fans. This was similar to the Indy 500 having a Memorial Day holiday as a rain date if needed.
Were you here when they practiced? Oh, you should have been, man. It was loud. It was like the old Offenhausers.
Every kid that comes up through whatever type of motorsports that he's in, at some point in his life or in his career, he would like to race at Indianapolis.
For television, it was expected the Brickyard would be carried either by ABC, which broadcast the Indy 500, or CBS, which broadcast the Daytona 500. Ultimately, the track did something different. Instead of a network paying the track for the broadcast rights, Indianapolis bought 3.5 hours of airtime on ABC and got to sell their own advertising. This was likely even more profitable. As soon as the event was announced, fans across the country raced to get tickets as if they had waited their entire lives for this moment. The Indiana Phone Company reported that one day after the race was announced, the Speedway ticket office received 70,000 phone calls during just a 5-minute period. But there was still debate over whether the race should happen or not. For decades, Indy carried the intangible mystique of running only one race per year, like the excitement of Willy Wonka's chocolate factory only opening up on very rare occasions. Many people were afraid a second race would take away some of the significance of the Indy 500. Among the opposition was defending IndyCar champion Bobby Rahal, who said, quote, "I believe the Indianapolis Motor Speedway should be used once a year for the Indianapolis 500. That is the tradition, and I don't believe you should mess with tradition, especially one as strong as the 500. Defending Indy 500 champion Al Unser Jr. said, quote, "If I get a chance to drive, I like the idea. But if I don't get a ride, I really don't like the idea of having anything but the 500 on the Speedway." Mario Andretti said, quote, "I hate to see it happen because to me, Indianapolis has always been a sacred ground for open-wheeled, single-seat thoroughbreds. Plus, there has always been a mystique to it." For a lot of people associated with IndyCar racing, this was just another sign that IndyCar had slipped, and maybe this would hurt the Indy 500. Journalist Robin Miller wrote in 1993, quote, "It's a tough thing to admit, especially if you've spent much of your life supporting, defending, and writing about something so close to your heart. But you can't dispute the facts. NASCAR has slingshot past Indy cars to become America's most popular form of motorsports, and the stock car set is threatening to put a lap on its open-wheeled competition. Bottom line, Winston Cup has more fans, cars, sponsors, competition, identity, and interest than Indy cars. While the IndyCar owners were fighting each other in the late 70s and early 80s, NASCAR was gaining speed and recognition."
I think the common remark from some IndyCar drivers is it will diminish the Indy 500. I think there's a lot to be learned from these stock car drivers. I think there's a certain nose in the air mentality, aloofness in IndyCar racing right now. And if they just follow these stock car drivers around and see how they relate with the fans, there's something to be learned.
But there were also many who liked the idea. At the time, Roger Penske owned Michigan International Speedway, which hosted NASCAR and IndyCar races, and said this was a great decision by the track. "It's the smartest thing the Speedway can do," he said. "It doesn't hurt our track, and it won't hurt Indianapolis. It will only make it better. Quite honestly, if I owned the track, I'd have a stock car race here too." Four-time Indy 500 winner Al Unser said, quote, "I think it's great. I've made statements before that if I owned the place, NASCAR or somebody else would have been here long ago. A place this size, it ought to be run more than once a year." Parnelli Jones said that compared to the Indy 500, he, quote, "would not be surprised if within a few years NASCAR draws bigger crowds."
The question I've been asking myself and everybody who expresses a little bit of displeasure with the announcement, why not? Why can't we use the facility for a second time during the year? And why shouldn't it be a stock car race? One thing that's always bothered me about the auto racing community, so many times we're fractionalized. IndyCar people, fans, dislike stock car racing. Stock car fans sometimes just don't like IndyCar racing. Drag racers don't like sprint car racing. If we would all come together as a unit and support auto racing in general and disregard the fact that only one race, and it's been an IndyCar race, has been held here since 1911. Disregard that. Let's become one unit. Let's support auto racing and have a great time for the Indy 500 and have a great time for the Brickyard 400.
Fans' excitement was very high. During the 1993 Indy 500, NASCAR teams representing Dale Earnhardt, Jeff Gordon, and Ricky Rudd set up souvenir haulers at the track to sell their merchandise to excited Indiana fans. Tickets for the Brickyard 400 were sold by mail order only, and lucky fans would be chosen by the track in the fall. Order forms were available beginning on July 1st, 1993 for Indy 500 ticket holders given priority. By July 5th, enough forms were returned that could have sold out the race 13 months in advance. Tickets for everyone else were available beginning on August 18th. Thousands of people returned the order form by express mail that day. By the fall of that year, it was said that 800,000 people applied for tickets. Other reports said up to 1.9 million people requested tickets. Unable to deal with so many requests, the track created a lottery system where a mix of some lucky Indy 500 fans and some new ones would get tickets. This angered some Indy 500 fans who thought they'd have priority. Despite the interest, the track removed temporary bleachers and declined to sell general admission infield tickets, for the sole reason being to keep Indy 500 seating capacity larger than the Brickyard and ensure the Indy 500 would remain the world's largest spectator event.
For the past 2 days, the top NASCAR Winston Cup teams have been here practicing in preparation for next year's Brickyard 400. Jeff Bodine was first in line as the cars roared out, and it was Bodine who would lead the first lap, barely edging Winston Cup points leader Dale Earnhardt into turn 1.
You wanted to lead that first lap, didn't you?
I would have. He blocked me. But, you know, you got the green. I led the first lap.
Passed him going down in 1.
Why not? He backed off.
It took a while for caution to become courage, but when it did, the testing got serious. Bobby Labonte was the day's fastest at 165.624. One of NASCAR's top rookies, Indiana's own Jeff Gordon, grew up in the shadow of the speedway and was the 4th quickest on the day.
I don't know how to describe it. It was just an unbelievable feeling, you know, just pulling out onto the warm-up lane and riding around, just seeing all the people going crazy, you know, and then getting out there on the racetrack. The racetrack's so smooth, and I mean, it was just a beautiful sight.
Another NASCAR newcomer on this muggy Monday was no stranger to the speedway at all. IndyCar veteran John Andretti charged out in the Kellogg's car at better than 161 miles an hour. When NASCAR tested at Indianapolis in 1992, the speedway had a different configuration. An apron separated the infield grass from the track, allowing the drivers a cushion on which to run through the corners. Well, for 1993, the cushion is gone, but will the racing be any different?
You know, they took out about a car width wide, and it doesn't matter to us for the standpoint of, sure, it's going to be a little harder to pass. You're going to have a little less racetrack, but everybody's got to run the same place.
It doesn't feel any different to me. The corners feel good, and so far, so good.
I think it's going to be a good race. I don't think you're going to see a single file through the corners like they talked about since they moved the apron. I don't see a problem with the apron being moved. I don't even miss it. Don't even know it's gone.
Day 1 of the 2-day testing session ended, but with a taste of how misleading the Speedway's smooth and fast racing surface can be and how unforgiving the walls can be. Coming out of turn 4, Kenny Wallace lost control, spun, crashed hard into the inside wall, and came to a rest at the pit entrance. Wallace suffered a cracked shoulder blade and was done for the week. I've never heard a crowd estimate for yesterday, Benny, but I've heard something around 100,000 people that came out just to watch the cars test and practice.
And it was just not people from the local area. It was people from everywhere, Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky. They just came from every place like a magnet to the racetrack.
They wanted to see day number 2 of testing for next year's Brickyard 400.
Okay, guys, what do you think?
Oh, we love it. We love it. Indianapolis
Great.
is the greatest.
Even though some parts of Indiana had 10 inches of rain overnight, the fans still turned out in huge numbers for the second day.
Why am I here today? That's why I'm here today.
Mark Martin, who's won 2 straight NASCAR Winston Cup races, got up to 165.905. The track was closed for an hour at noon. At that time, King Richard took his car around the famed 2.5-mile oval for a few ceremonial laps at 151 miles per hour. Then donated the car to the Hall of Fame Museum.
I tell you, I'm really, really honored to be able to present a stock car to the Indies car museum. You know, I think that all the people in Indianapolis, all the racing fans from everywhere, whether IndyCar fans or stock car fans, I think this is just going to really be a great deal for everybody involved. And hope you all come back in May and then come back in August, okay?
After the lunch break, during which Richard Petty took the ceremonial laps around the track and presented his car to the museum, we had some real excitement. We got about 8 or 10 cars out there on the racetrack. We wondered if this was going to happen, and indeed it did. They lined up behind the pace car and then threw the green flag for what I guess you could call some drafting practice.
Drafting practice, and NASCAR told the guys, please be careful because we don't know what's going to happen here. Well, they went down in turn 1. Brett Bodine pulled up behind John Andretti in the 14 car. Andretti lost it, and other cars come piling in. P.J. Jones in 9. There's Mark Martin in the 6 car, and Jimmy Spencer in the 12 car also involved.
There's a car against the wall. A car then is hit by another car, and another car involved. And cars are spinning and running everywhere. We have 4 or 5 cars involved. Wow.
How about the pocket of traditionalists, which may even be more than just a pocket? The folks, the old liners, who just can't imagine a stock car running at the Brickyard.
Well, I think there were a lot more of those when they first announced the race, but now they are beginning to accept it. Perhaps there are some drivers who participate in the Indy 500 that are still a little incensed that this is an intrusion into their territory, but as far as the fans, I think everybody is very much behind this event.
Over the fall, there was a wave of interest for IndyCar drivers to run in NASCAR, including defending F1 champion Nigel Mansell, who had just won the IndyCar championship. Journalist Gordon Kirby wrote, quote, "If Mansell really wants to earn the admiration of the great American public, he must also try his hand at the country's most popular form of motor racing, the NASCAR Winston Cup Championship. To really make his mark, Mansell must also race successfully and sportingly in NASCAR's season-opening Daytona 500. By early 1994, all of the best IndyCar drivers were rumored to be in contact with NASCAR teams. It was rumored that Mario Andretti might run a second car for Robert Yates as a teammate to Ernie Irvan, based upon their shared Texaco sponsorship. But Yates denied that, saying, quote, "I don't think it's right to take all the sponsor money for one race or a 5-race deal. I think it makes the sport lopsided." Then it was rumored Hendrick Motorsports might enter an additional 2 cars, with Andretti driving one of them. Michael Andretti was possible too, as were Al Unser Sr. and Jr. and Bobby Rahal. IndyCar team owner Dick Simon bought 2 Ford Thunderbirds from the Wood brothers and was expected to enter his 2 drivers Lynn St. James and Raul Boesel in the Brickyard. Emerson Fittipaldi said he would try NASCAR if Roger Penske wanted to enter him. Richard Childress and Jack Roush were expected to enter extra cars. But as the race got closer, the IndyCar invasion did not materialize. Most teams declined to enter extra cars. Dick Simon instead chose to enter Jim Sauter instead of his IndyCar drivers. Danny Sullivan did find a ride driving what was called the corporate car of Indianapolis, an underfunded car sponsored by many local businesses. Ken Schrader helped Gary Bettenhausen get a ride driving for Phil Barkdahl. 66-year-old Herschel McGriff, who entered the first Southern 500 in 1950, also entered the Brickyard 400. McGriff was born in Muncie, Indiana in 1927. But the biggest entry came from A.J. Foyt, who bought a Ford from Team Penske and came out of retirement. Foyt's wife was reportedly unhappy that the 59-year-old entered, saying she pushed him in a wheelchair for the last time. After making the race, a track announcer said to Foyt, quote, "Your wife probably isn't happy you qualified," to which Foyt jokingly replied, "But my girlfriend is, so who cares?" drawing the cheers of the thousands in the stands.
You can imagine what a great business the concession stands have been doing with all of this stuff dated for this race only. I mean, they have been doing land office business down there, and about anything that you can think of can be purchased. Sweatshirts, T-shirts, coffee cups, little cars, anything that you might want.
The Brickyard 400 merchandise was unlike anything ever seen. A wide variety of souvenirs were sold.
Break the sound barrier and save your pennies in this limited edition F-16 fighter jet bank.
Capture the pageantry of the first Brickyard with this collector's plate. If you're a serious race fan who wants to make a fashion statement in a wearable collectible, you'll love this custom-made leather and twill jacket, but only 75 are available. And at $399.99, they won't last long. So order now.
To match the Borg-Warner Trophy for the Indy 500, the track unveiled the PPG Trophy, which was 3 feet tall and weighed 135 pounds. The winner would get his name engraved on one of 51 miniature bricks that made up the base. The total purse for the race was $3.2 million, what was then the largest in NASCAR history.
I think you have to go back and you look at Winston Cup racing and you say, okay, what were big moments in Winston Cup racing or in NASCAR racing? I think Darlington, when they first opened Darlington, when they built Daytona, you know, when they came off the beach and they built Daytona, huge moment. I think when the factories pulled out in the late 60s and R.J. Reynolds picked up the sport, huge moment for racing. I think when CBS did the first Daytona 500 live, that was another big step. So I think when you go back and you look at places where the really peaks in the sport, then I think Indy's going the next peak from when CBS did the thing in 79.
After years of build-up, the Brickyard 400 had arrived and provided exactly what people have been waiting for.
From NASCAR's early years on the sand, to dirt, to asphalt, and now to bricks, NASCAR has come to Indianapolis as each driver seeks to become the first to put his name on the PPG Trophy in the inaugural Brickyard 400. It is really impossible to explain the impact that this event is going to have on the world of motorsports. It is just, without question, possibly the motorsports event of, well, at least the last century, I think.
Well, I don't think there's any question about it, Bob, and I think this event is going to take NASCAR Winston Cup racing to another level. We've seen tremendous growth in this sport in recent years, and I think this is going to be another giant step upward.
Bill France told me just about an hour ago, 15 years from now, when we sit around the old stove and talking about things that happened in the world of auto racing, we'll always talk about the Brickyard 400.
The answer to the trivia question that will be asked many years in advance, who was the first to attempt a qualification for the Brickyard 400? The answer, H.B. Bailey.
So Earnhardt looks like he's on the way to perhaps having fast time of the day.
Theoretically, this should be the pole sitter for the moment. Dale Earnhardt takes the checkered flag. He's completed the run. Let's see if he has knocked Brett Bodine from the pole position. He did it, 171.726, a 52.409, and Earnhardt is on the pole.
The fans like it.
The fans love it. So we have a new pole sitter as Rick Mast comes out of turn number 2 down the backstretch. He's been very fast. Here he comes.
It's going to be close.
Hustling to that checkered flag. Mast completes the run. He's 2 miles an hour quicker in turn 4.
I think you beat him, Bob. We'll see when the official time comes up.
Yes, he did. 172.414, a 52.200 second lap. Jerry Punch is with Dale Earnhardt.
Bill, a big smile, a great run for you, but that run didn't last very long. Rick Mast just beat you.
I didn't think it would.
There's no quiet moments if you sit on the pole for the first Brickyard 400. The crowd requesting the autographs of Rick Mast. How much of it was just a shot in the dark, the run for the pole, Rick?
Well, not really much of it. We came here last week and tested. The car ran awfully good. We drew an early number. Drew 14, about broke my heart. Then the clouds rolled in. It kind of equalized qualifying for us, and everybody kind of went out equal. And you know, we had a good lap. Now we got to do it for 160. The 160th lap. That's the one I'm after, man. Not the first one, not halfway. 160.
You know, we used to see short fields in NASCAR Winston Cup racing. Not enough cars to fill the field. For this race, there were nearly 90 entries to fill the 40 starting positions that would line up for today's inaugural Brickyard 400. So really the challenge, the first challenge for the team and drivers, simply to make the starting field for this event.
This is a great experience. This is probably the, you know, certainly one of the great highlights in our series and in NASCAR's history ever since the inception of NASCAR. And we're just pleased to be here and sharing this great occasion. I know our drivers are just absolutely excited beyond belief to be competing in an event here. And What this does for us is every driver in America at one time or another wants to race at Indianapolis. Those that elected a stock car career prior to today, they didn't really have that opportunity. Today they do.
Mrs. Mary F. Holman.
Gentlemen, start your engines.
A new tradition begins as the green flag is about to come out to signal the beginning of the inaugural Brickyard 400. And the green is out. Earnhardt, as a matter of fact, touched the wall as he came out of turn number 4. Watch this. He's running in second position at this moment. This was last lap ago. Oh, he hit it pretty good, Benny.
He hit it pretty good, and I'm sure that Richard Jonas and that crew are concerned.
Brett Bodine is the 11th leader of the day, and with his lead, he becomes the 3rd Bodine to lead in the event. There was contact between Jeff and Brett.
Looks like there might have been some contact between those two cars because Brett got his car. Oh! And a Jeff Bodine spin on turn 4 right in front of the entire field.
Look at everybody going to the inside to try to avoid the trouble. Some coming down pit road. Gordon makes a move to the inside in the backstretch. Does he have the lead in 3? Yes, he does.
Now then, Rusty and earlier almost made contact as they came off that second corner. Here's Rusty trying to get back on the inside, and he is back on the inside, Bob.
Jeff has got to give him room. They're going to come through turn number 4 side by side and onto the straightaway. Some great racing, and again they touch as they come down the straightaway. It's Wallace to the inside and Jeff Gordon to the outside, and Ernie Irvin is a factor too.
Now, Jeff can't get back to the inside because Ernie is there. Jeff Gordon's going to try to pass him on the outside, Bob. Can they run 2 abreast through the corner? You bet you they can.
Gordon goes back ahead as Rusty gets a little loose in the second corner.
Jeff Gordon is radioing in that he's got a problem. The problem is, as you said, every time that Ernie Irvin gets up to the rear decklet, he gets extremely loose. He was pleading those last 2 laps that he had to let him go by. And that looks like what might be happening right now.
Once again, Irvin moves to the inside and challenges Jeff down the backstretch.
Jeff just will not let go, Bob. He will not let go. He says, I'm going to win this race, but this time he does. It's going to be tough on those crewmen. Oh, here we go. Ernie slipped 1 and 1. Ernie slipped, and Jeff Gordon gets alongside.
That wasn't on orders from the crew. That was because Ernie missed the entrance to turn 1, and Jeff saw it and immediately went for the hole.
Something's wrong with Ernie. Something has happened to the 28 car, Bob.
Irvin slows down and is going to lose second position. Irvin drops off the pace, and now Brett Bodine goes into second. Ernie Irvin heads for the warm-up lane, and Jeff Gordon has the lead.
The right front tire went flat on the 28 car.
As the race neared the end, a young couple in the infield mentioned to a bathroom attendant that they wanted to get married after the race was over. The attendant happened to be an ordained minister, so the couple changed into a tuxedo and wedding gown and were married as the cars crossed the finish line.
And Jeff Gordon is about to write his name in the racing history books. Years from today, when 79 stock car races have been run here, we'll remember the name. Jeff Gordon, winner of the inaugural Brickyard 400.
After winning, Jeff Gordon wanted a quiet evening with his wife at a motel watching the race on TV. He tried to order a pizza and was told it would take 1 hour and 45 minutes to arrive. After telling the restaurant he just won the race, Gordon got the pizza in 25 minutes. ABC's broadcast of the race got an impressive 5.7 rating. The rating share estimated that 20% of people watching TV at the time were watching the race. By the late 1990s, the Brickyard 400 had surpassed the Indy 500 in many ways. Crowds for the Brickyard 400 qualifying were higher than those for the Indy 500. The ticket prices were also higher. The Indy 500 still had more attendance, but only because the track continued to remove temporary bleacher seats so the Brickyard 400 wouldn't be larger than the 500. In 1999, Mike Helton, then NASCAR's chief operating officer, said, quote, "I think when NASCAR celebrates its 100-year anniversary, we will look back at the starting of the Brickyard as a watershed mark in our history. It was the element that lifted NASCAR to a higher profile. It will be remembered as one of NASCAR's biggest moments outside of Bill France forming NASCAR in the first place." While a lot has already been said about the decline in popularity of the Brickyard 400 over the 2000s, it's important to remember just how big it once was, and likely can be again. A strong Brickyard 400 is vital for NASCAR. As Mike Helton said in 1999, quote, "The fact that we got there for the first race, the place was packed, was unbelievable. Now that the relationship exists, it's important for the health of NASCAR to keep growing it."